Good afternoon, gentlemen and ladies, friends. My name is Clementina Rind, and I am honored to be able to speak with you today. I also have the honor of holding the government position here in Virginia of public printer, and I know there are quite a few matters that perhaps you wish to discuss with me upon that topic. This year of 1774 that we find ourselves in, I think, is a challenging one for all of us. I know that many of us perhaps would not have thought that we would find ourselves where we do this fall. Even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, how could it come to this? How could we come to such circumstances between us and Parliament that our own gentlemen representatives would be forced to make decisions perhaps they would not usually do so? I, of course, speak, friends, that the fact that here in Williamsburg we sit with but half a government, having had our elected representatives, the gentlemen brought from each county in Virginia, dissolved back in May. And recently, friends, they regathered at the Capitol building, not too far from where I sit now in the Secretary's office, to discuss and debate what now faces us as a united body, no longer as individual colonies, no longer as Virginians or men of Massachusetts or New Jersey or North Carolina, but no, as they refer to it, as Americans. There's been a great deal of many things that have brought us to this point, and I should hope that you have read most of them in my newspaper. And if you have not, friends, I would encourage you to subscribe to it. You shall always be kept informed of the latest events regarding not only our particular gentlemen, but the events that have transpired in other colonies as well. I, of course, speak with veiled reference to the events that transpired last December with the destruction of the tea in the port of Boston. But friends, truly, we cannot even blame our current situation upon the men of Boston, although I know perhaps as Virginians we might wish to. If we could blame everything upon Massachusetts Bay, I think we would all be very pleased with that, but we cannot. No, true in fact, friends, can we even blame our present circumstances between ourselves and Parliament upon Lord Dunmore, although I know perhaps many would wish to lay blame at his feet. No, friends, I think we must go farther back, even before 1765, and the decision that Parliament made, a decision that perhaps is driven by the thing that drives so many of us within politics, within business, within economy, and that is money. Is it not, friends? Money has driven so many of the decisions that has happened over the past 10 years. And the thing that started this, truly, friends, is money. The fact that Parliament felt that they did not receive enough money in payment, in repayment, truly, from the colonies, Virginia and the rest, in regards to the last war against the French, the 7 Years' War, that they did not receive enough to pay them back. Now, I think many of us here within the colonies, friends, would argue that we had paid them back, not only in money, but also in blood. Blood spilt by the men that we sent to defend our own frontiers. But Parliament said, no, that was not enough. And we shall do something, perhaps, that, they won't mind over in the colonies. We shall simply ignore decades of law, of how things have been done, and we will lay a tax upon them. Now, friends, it was not about the tax itself, was it? We all know that taxes will be with us until we die. No, it was about how they laid forward the tax. How they simply ignored all of our rights, all of our liberties, and our own elected representatives here within the colonies. And it has been done many, many, many times before that Parliament says, we need money to pay this thing. You decide how best for your people in Virginia or New York how to raise the money. And our representatives, our gentlemen burgesses here in Virginia go, yes, we shall raise the money through this sort of tax. It has worked very well before, but Parliament has decided perhaps, I do not know exactly the reason, friends, but it seems as if they wish to remind us. It seems that they wish to remind us that they are more powerful than we perhaps think they are. Because it is about money sometimes, friends. As much as I wish to not say that, but it is. And so Parliament continued to lay tax after tax upon us, and we continued to protest, and they were repealed time and time over again. Until last year, when the men of Boston decided that they could no longer hold their peace, and their so-called Sons of Liberty decided to destroy property in the middle of the night. I know, friends, that we regard some of our college boys here in Williamsburg about in the same light as some of the people of Boston regard the Sons of Liberty, which is not very well. But again, friends, that was merely another symptom in this great disease that has been growing between us and Parliament, and that I have been printing not only within my private newspaper, but also in the behest of the gentlemen burgesses, the government contracts. And so it has brought us to this point, where we but have half a government in Virginia, and the dissolved half, our former gentlemen representatives, have recently met within the Capitol building in an extra-legal form, which whoever would have thought 10 years ago that that would happen? But they have done so. These are large events, friends, writ large across the sky, and sometimes I think it is easy to forget how they do affect all of us. Myself, it has not been an easy summer. I am certain that some of you remember that I lost my dear husband, my dear partner, your public printer at the time, William Rind, last year. And I have been endeavoring to do the best that I can, not only to make sure that this paper is what you desire, but also that it support my household and my children. But also, friends, I have been increasingly concerned about the fact that the thing that we hold most dear as subjects of the crown, as Englishmen, which is our liberty, has become more and more threatened by our Parliament, men who are meant to represent us well. No doubt you have read in my paper over the summer that I have not been in the best of health, and that is true. In fact, recently, about a month ago, decided to place within my paper a letter to all of you describing not only my continued hope to publish the paper, should Providence decide to relieve me from my present illness, but also my hope that I'd be able to continue to print the paper in a way that would continue to allow my press to be a free one, to allow the liberties that we enjoy as subjects of the crown to continue to be made heard. But it is difficult. I find that there are mornings that I wake and my strength entirely is gone from me, which is difficult. Not only when you have a business to maintain, but also when you have 4 very active children. My 3 sons are quite rambunctious, especially early in the mornings. My oldest is 11, my youngest is 3. She is my daughter. The rest of the boys are between those ages. And it is difficult sometimes, particularly this summer, friends, for me not only to manage the politic and the government business that is falling upon my shoulders, but even the strength to make sure that my household is functioning. Because you see, friends, I am my household and my children's sole support. Everything falls down upon my shoulders solidly, which means my actions and my intentions will affect my children. But the trouble is, friends, is that my business and my economy relies upon our gentlemen representatives, or former representatives, and their decisions. And their recent decision is what has all of us here in Virginia, I believe, holding our breaths, which is why we find ourselves in such a tenuous position now, in September of this year. Gentlemen representatives have been appointed. I have it written here, the exact words. They were agreeable to be appointed at the general meeting of the late representatives of the colony. They were deliberate and consulted upon the most effectual measures to be taken to relieve America from her present distressed situation. Her present distressed situation, of course, being the fact that our Parliament has completely begun to ignore our rights and liberties as subjects of the crown. The gentlemen who were appointed to gather and to take Virginia's concerns to Philadelphia of all places. Because of course, friends, when you are about to have an extra-legal meeting, this form of this grand congress, as they so decided, where would you put it? I would think you would put it in the most influential, the largest and the wealthiest of His Majesty's colonies, yes, which would be Virginia. But no, they decided to have it in all of places in Philadelphia, which means I have to wait longer than I wish to be able to reprint what they do, but that is another matter, friends. But they are going to Philadelphia. They are going to discuss what is now facing us as a united body. The trouble is, friends, my concern is that I'm afraid that some of these gentlemen, not necessarily the gentlemen delegates who are going, but some of the other gentlemen of politic, have begun to think that if we have conflict in some manner with England, they may not need to repay the debts that they owe English merchants. It is all about money sometimes, is it not, friends? And yet, we cannot ignore the fact that Parliament has continued to trod upon our rights, our liberties, and our privileges given to us by the Crown, given to us by hundreds of years of English common law, given to us by the constitutional papers, even the Magna Carta itself. And who am I to stand here in Virginia as a subject of the Crown, willing and loyal, to allow Parliament to trod upon them in such a way? Because it is my children, after all, friends, who will suffer or benefit from what we now do. The trouble is that the gentlemen who are gathering now, preparing themselves to go to Philadelphia, whatever they decide, whether you or I agree with it or not, whatever they decide, they themselves will most likely not have to carry out. It may not affect them greatly. No, it is us. We will have to carry it out. It will affect us for the better or for the ill. Forgive me. I did not mean to allow my passions to run away with me. It is a bad habit of mine. My husband used to tease me. He would say to me, Clementina, well, he would not call me Clementina, but for the purpose of the story, that is what he would say. He would say, Clementina, my goodness, your passions, madam. Which was usually quite amusing to me, because usually we were in the midst of some sort of heated discussion and his passions were equal to mine. I miss him greatly. But I spoke at the beginning that we were to have a conversation, and a conversation involves more than one person speaking. So I will hold my tongue and yield the conversation to you, dear friends. We may speak of anything you wish, your present concerns, things that I have mentioned. I shall turn it over to you, madam, who I believe will assist me.
Yes, Mrs. Rind, it's a joy to have you speaking with us again, and we have indeed been joined by friends from all across the country and even world, eager to hear what you have to say. But
my goodness.
Before we get to their questions, which they have started to give us, we wanted to ask you what you think the best outcome for you and Williamsburg will be from this gathering of men in Philadelphia.
What the best outcome will be. It is a hard thing to answer. I think you will agree what the best thing might be. For each individual, what is best is vastly different. I might think what is best for Williamsburg and myself is going to be very different than what, say, Representative Mr. Pendleton, who is going to Congress, might think. But I believe, this is one opinion, I believe the best thing is that a continued open conversation with Parliament, but more specifically with our King, could come out of this Congress. The assurance and the decision that we are still subjects of the Crown and that we are loyal, but we will no longer allow our liberties to be trod upon in such a way. That is what I hope to come from this Congress. I hope to find gentle and civil words and compromise come from this Congress. Because it terrifies me to think of what else might come from it. But thankfully, I think the gentlemen representatives who have been sent, most of them, not all, most of them are men of even temper who consider carefully not only their own experiences, but the experiences of the people who they represent. Some of them, I refer to Mr. Patrick Henry and Mr. Richard Henry Lee, perhaps are more radical in their approach to certain things. And I hope that the other gentlemen, Colonel Washington, Speaker Randolph, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Pendleton, I hope these gentlemen will perhaps restrain their fellow delegates. But that is what I hope to come of it. I hope to come an accord once more, a bridging of the chasm between us and our Parliament.
Thank you, Madam. We have a few questions about your trade. Sean has asked, how did you learn your trade as a printer? And Nikki then followed up with, is it unusual for a woman to take on such a trade?
Both excellent questions. I thank you for them. I was not apprenticed to be a printer. I had no desire to be a printer. I did not wake up as a small child and think this is what I wish to do with my life. But life has its own varieties of bringing us to situations, does it not? And I fell in love with a printer. Well, actually, he fell in love with me first, and then he had to convince me of his existence. And then I fell in love with him, friends. And I think you will understand that when a business and a household become one, both must help the other. And so I learned everything I know from printing from my husband and his journeyman. I have worked alongside him. I did work alongside him for all the years of our marriage. He taught me to typeset. He taught me the understanding of the intricacies of printing. I was much better than him at accounting, so he did not need to instruct me in anything in that matter. I have kept both the business and household accounts for the entirety of our marriage. So I learned my training from him. And as far as to the curiosity of is it common for women to take over a business, yes, it is very common. In fact, I can think of women here within the city who have done so. Mrs. Vogue, Mrs. Dean, many women, Mrs. Maupin, who has taken over her husband's tavern, many women who have continued. Oftentimes, and I think you will understand, friends, oftentimes it is how we can continue to provide for our households. As far as printing is concerned, no, it is not extremely common for women to practice the trade, but you will still find us. Mrs. Green of Maryland is printing that paper, and then over in England there are many women who work in the larger printing offices. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rind. Sean has followed up with another question. Do you try to print anything that would promote women's rights or contributions?
An excellent question. I thank you, Sean, for it. Do I print things that encourage women's contributions? Yes. I would say that there's a great deal more poetry in my paper than there used to be, and those are often submitted by my readers. Sometimes it is hard to tell, though, the sex of the person who has written me something, because oftentimes many things that I include within my press are anonymous. So unless they write to me quite often, I do not necessarily know whom it is coming from, be they a man or a woman or a gentleman or a lady. But I find it interesting that you refer to the rights of women and why I might need to promote that. The rights of freeborn English women and freeborn English men are the same. There is no difference between our rights. So if one is supporting the rights of English men, you're also supporting, therefore, the rights of English women, for they are the same. I myself, as a freeborn subject of the Crown, have the right to my freedom, my liberty. I have the right to pursue property. I have the right to petition my government and to be heard by them, many other rights. There's a difference, though, between rights and privileges. Privileges are certain things that are granted to certain people who meet the qualifications for those privileges. Those privileges oftentimes, friends, are to vote and to hold office. But even sometimes those privileges can be extended when necessary. So yes, I will always print and reprint the avocation of not only men's rights but women's rights as well, because they are the same under the Crown.
Thank you, Madam. One more question in regards to your business. If the House of Burgesses is dissolved, who will be paying you to print?
It's funny you should ask that, madam. I asked myself the same question as soon as I heard that they were to officially be dissolved. That contract, friends, is rather important to me. It is a good 300 to 400 pounds a year. And with 3 sons who are growing out of their clothes and eating everything constantly, I think you can understand that that 300 to 400 pounds is most important to myself. Thus far, I have not had difficulty with being paid. The payment has transitioned from coming to me from the clerk of the House, but rather from His Excellency's secretary. Now with His Excellency moving out to the frontier to engage in a war, I am concerned that some of those monies might be slowed down, but thankfully I've already received a generous portion of my contract, and I should hope in the next few months to receive the rest of it. My concern is that the gentleman's actions in Philadelphia will perhaps cause our governor not to extend any monies, perhaps thinking that I will continue to act as public printer to a government that is no longer technically sitting. I will not, of course, not only because it is not within my contract, but also if they wish to have something printed in my paper, they must pay for it. The fact of money, which is so integral to most of our economy and our trades and our businesses, is something that presses upon my mind. It is why I have just realized I have perhaps slighted one of the delegates, Mr. Richard Henry Lee, and I do wish to apologize. I did not mean to speak with slights against him. I put forward this, friends, because his brother owns the house that I rent. And I would never wish to speak against either of the gentleman Lees. I merely expressed my concern of his temper, which is well known. I shall hold my tongue before I say too much more. Madam?
No, please. In fact, Mrs. Rind, could you tell us your opinions about the delegates that have been chosen? I think everyone would be very interested to hear.
I have been caught out. Yes, the gentlemen delegates. In fact, if I remember correctly, I have written down all of their names. Yes, the delegates who have been appointed is Mr. Peyton Randolph, who was the moderator of the general meetings just held, Mr. Richard Henry Lee, of course, Colonel George Washington, Mr. Patrick Henry, Mr. Richard Bland, Mr. Benjamin Harrison, and Mr. Edmund Pendleton. As I said earlier, I think it is an interesting mix of gentlemen. I think Mr. Lee and Mr. Henry are known to most of us as men of great passion and determination in what they believe is right. I do have concerns, however, that Mr. Henry oftentimes allows his words and his passions to run before wise decision-making. My children often refer to the fact that Mr. Henry, when he comes into my accounting office, which he does quite regularly, they always know when he is there. For Mr. Henry has 2 levels of speaking. It is loud and it is booming. And I think occasionally when he is speaking in a booming manner, friends, that he forgets what impact his words might have. But I do believe that the other gentlemen, specifically Colonel Washington, will perhaps temper them. I think Colonel Washington is a man of good sense, and since he is the only one of them who has ever experienced conflict in an intimate manner, I think he would perhaps be chief to champion the cause to prevent it from occurring. And I do believe that Mr. Randolph, who has been Speaker for quite some time in Williamsburg, understands Virginians well and their troubles and their concerns. And I do believe Mr. Harrison, Mr. Pendleton, I believe, and Mr. Bland, of course, I believe they will follow carefully in those footsteps. All of them, though, I think will consider carefully whatever is put forward. I hope that they are not swayed, however, by Massachusetts and their delegates.
Very carefully answered, Madam. Thank you. We have a question from Christian, who is joining us from Germany, and it's a bit of a more sensitive subject, so you'll please forgive, but he asks in particular if you have many men as friends, I suppose on a professional level.
An interesting question. I thank you for it. I do have many contacts and conversations and friendships with many of the tradesmen here in the city, since I am one of them. There is a vast network of tradespeople and merchants in Williamsburg, but it extends not only through the rest of Virginia, but also over to England as well. And due to the nature of my profession, I also converse with many men throughout the colonies who are also fellow printers. I speak with them, I write to them quite regularly, and they write back to me, mostly of matters relating to printing and what each of us might wish to put into our press at certain times. So yes, I do develop acquaintances. I would not say close friendships with many gentlemen, or men, since we are speaking of fellow tradesmen. I have many acquaintances with gentlemen of the city as well, but I would not venture to say that I am an intimate friend of theirs. They are kind and condescending to acknowledge me and to engage me for their business. There are people that I have grown close to, that my husband and I have known for quite some time here in Williamsburg. The Maupins, of course, are one of them. Mr. Dean, before his death. The Craigs are also a family that we have become quite close to, both Mr. and Mrs. Craig. But also, I think if I might read between the lines of your question, madam, if you would allow me, it is a question that has been often posed to me over the last year. As a printer, you become very skilled at reading between the lines of what people wish to say. And I will be very blunt, if you allow me, sir. I have no intention of remarrying. There is no one upon this earth, I think, who could come equal to my William. And Mrs. Rind's press will remain Mrs. Rind's press. Madam.
Thank you, Mrs. Rind. I think that you got to the heart of that question very well. Going back to the business that you were speaking on when we first joined you, you're speaking of this upcoming Congress. And in particular, you made mention that you were hoping that the Virginian delegation would not be swayed by Massachusetts. So with that in mind, and knowing that you yourself come from Maryland, what is the thing that you most fear from Congress?
What is the thing that I most fear? I think you are right to regard and refer back to the delegates of Massachusetts. As I spoke earlier, I think many of us know that the men of Boston and Massachusetts are just as prone to rioting and hot tempers as anyone in the world. I'm also concerned that there are gentlemen within Congress who are allowing their own, I hesitate to say, but I believe that there might be gentlemen who are allowing their own interests sway what they are about to do. And that is my fear. My fear is that the gentlemen delegates from each of the colonies forget that they are representing a larger body and not just themselves and their own interests. Our economy depends upon it. Our livelihoods, my children's future and my children's livelihoods depend upon it. So my fear would be that they forget those things and act in a manner that will not benefit us. My other fear, though, perhaps more of a practical nature, is that I will not receive the information from Congress quickly enough to be able to reprint it. But that is more of a practical matter. I think what all of us fear, I do not think I just speak for myself, is what Parliament will do. If Parliament was inclined to act so rashly against Boston and the, 120 men who destroyed tea by closing that port, what will they do when our gentlemen have gathered in a Congress, truly an extra legal form of government? That is my fear. If they have sent troops to Boston, how easy will it be to send troops here to Williamsburg? Anything else, madam?
Thank you for that. We have had a friend who must be more familiar with you than the general public make a comment. Denise has asked what type of illness you're experiencing.
I thank you, madam, for your curiosity. It is one that I have struggled with. I'm not a woman of medical science, although I have called often upon Dr. Galt and Dr. Pasteur over the past several months. It is an illness that comes and goes, one that troubles me regularly. I seem to have developed it about a year ago. I have heard some gentlemen refer to it as the intermittent fever, but then you know doctors, they can never agree with each other. So I will trust Providence that he will enable me to battle whatever it is. I hope. It is not the same illness, however, that my husband died of. That I do know. My husband died of an illness that was common to printers, an inflammation, essentially, friends, of the lungs. And it is often caused, and we thought we had done everything we could to prevent it by keeping the shop well ventilated and etc., as suggested by our gentlemen of science, but Providence wills certain things to be the way it is. But I shall also put forward, Madam, that you will probably have noted my repeated reminders in the paper that even though I have been ill recently, it does not mean that I am dead, and that you must not pay your fees to the paper. And so hopefully my slight, subtle encouragements that even though I have not perhaps been mistress of myself as well as I wish, you still have to pay your accounts. Not that any of you have not paid your accounts, of course. I speak of other gentlemen whose names I could mention, but I will not, who have not paid their accounts on time. But perhaps I stray from the original intention of the question, madam.
No, in fact, our time is coming short with you, Mrs. Rind, as I know that you are quite busy today. So
yes.
With that, if you do have any parting words to give to our august body who have joined us, I'm sure that they would be more than happy to hear them from you.
I would be pleased to. I think, friends, that we have found ourselves in such a series of events over the past 10 years that we have not allowed ourselves to stop and take a moment and examine perhaps what we think now. Yes, our rights and liberties have been trod upon by Parliament. We cannot ignore that fact. But we also cannot ignore the fact that we were born with one purpose, and that is to breathe free air as subjects of the Crown, subjects of His Majesty the King. For myself, friends, I look forward to the future, and I suppose you might say the legacy of not only my husband, but of my press. And that legacy I see reflected in the eyes and the smiles of my children. I will be frank with you, friends. I've experienced too much death in my life, from the death of my father to the death of one of my children to the death of my husband, not to know when it is coming near. And I am worried. I'm worried that our present circumstances that we find ourselves in will erase the pure fact that my children were born as subjects of the Crown with rights and with liberties. And that is my hope. Whatever this Congress comes to, whatever our gentlemen representatives decide, that they remember, first and foremost, that we Englishmen hold our liberty most dear. I have the deepest desire, friends, to continue doing my best to be not only your public printer, but also the editor and mistress of the Virginia Gazette, that I continue to live up to the words upon the motto of my paper, and that is to be open to all parties, but influenced by none. But above all, friends, I should hope for the success of my children and of Virginia. I am so very pleased that we could gather and have conversation together, friends. It is always delightful to be able to engage in civil conversation. Perhaps our gentlemen who are about to meet in this Congress in this year of 1774 could be reminded of that. I know I'm certain there will be some heated arguments between the colonies, as usual. But friends, I wish to say this, and then we will say our farewells. No matter what happens in this year of 1774, no matter what occurs within politics, within business, within religion, within our economy, please, friends, let us remember that we rely upon each other as one person to another in everything we do. Friends, I thank you for joining me. I'm your very humble servant, Clementina Rind.
Clementina Rind died on September 25, 1774, leaving behind her children, her household, and her press. Her children would live to adulthood. However, her press would fold within 2 years of her death.